Back in the kitchens of working class Australia during the 1950s, the 1960s, the 1970s, and the 1980s, meals were not about Instagram. They were not about MasterChef. They were about getting food on the table after a long day at the factory, the farm, or the office. Mums did not plan fancy menus. They stretched whatever was in the cupboard, whatever could be turned into something hot and filling before Dad got home. Food was practical, not pretty. Yet these humble dishes defined an era remembered today with a mix of nostalgia and relief that times have changed. Take the choco. If you grew up in Queensland or New South Wales, you will remember the vine crawling over the back fence, the chook shed, or that great Australian icon, the outdoor dunny. During the Depression, the choco saved lives. One vine could produce hundreds of pear-shaped vegetables, and families who had nothing else had chocos, boiled chocos, baked chocos, choco pie, where mums disguised them as apples with enough sugar and lemon. There is an old Australian saying, "He could not train a choco vine to grow up a dunny wall," a way of saying someone was completely useless. By the 1950s, chocos were still everywhere, but they carried the stain of poverty. The bland taste and slimy texture when peeled did not help. Ask anyone who ate them through hard times, and they will tell you they never wanted to see one again. Some remember them fondly, most shudder at the thought. Then there was bread and dripping. Nearly every household had a jar sitting on the kitchen bench or in the fridge, filled with the cooled fat from Sunday roast. By Monday morning, it had set into a thick white block with a darker, savoury jelly layer at the bottom. Mums would spread it across slices of white bread, sprinkle a bit of salt, and hand it to kids heading off to school. It was not glamorous. The taste was rich, meaty, and heavy, but it was free. Families could not afford to throw away anything that could fill a belly. The smell of dripping on toast was as much a part of the Australian kitchen as the Hills hoist was part of the backyard. If bread and dripping used up the fat, bubble and squeak used up everything else. Leftover vegetables from Sunday's roast, usually cabbage and potato, were chopped together and fried in a pan until the edges went crispy and brown. The name came from the sound it made while cooking, those little bubbles and squeaks as the mixture caught in the hot fat. It wasn't anyone's favourite meal, but it was reliable. Miners and shearers swore it tasted better reheated for breakfast, especially with a fried egg on top. In many homes, it was Monday's dinner, proof that nothing from Sunday's table would ever go to waste. Speaking of that Sunday roast, for many families it was not lamb at all. It was mutton, sheep over 2 years old, tougher and stronger in flavour than the lamb we know today. Mothers could stretch one leg of mutton into 4 or 5 meals. The roast on Sunday, cold slices on Monday, stew on Tuesday, soup on Wednesday, and rissoles made from the scraps by Thursday. Lamb shanks, now a gastropub favourite, were once considered poverty food. One grandmother famously sent her grandchildren to the butcher with strict instructions to say the shanks were for the dog. She could not bear anyone thinking the family was that hard up. Today, Australians eat barely a fifth of the lamb and mutton we once did, and actual mutton has all but disappeared from the butcher's window. What filled the gap when meat was scarce? Offal. And no cut appeared more regularly than lamb's fry and bacon. Lamb's fry in Australia meant liver, sliced thin, soaked in milk to soften the metallic taste, then fried with rashers of bacon until the kitchen filled with that unmistakable smell. Ministry of Health pamphlets in the 1950s promoted it heavily for iron and vitamins, and school canteens made sure entire generations grew up with the memory, whether they liked it or not. Children often dreaded it. Fathers ate it without complaint. It divided families as sharply as Holden versus Ford. Some still remember it fondly, smothered in gravy. Others say the smell alone is enough to turn their stomach, even today. If lamb's fry divided opinion, crumbed lamb's brains caused outright horror. Yet through the 1950s, 1960s and 1970s, brains were considered a treat in many Australian homes. They were soaked in water to remove the blood, coated in breadcrumbs and fried in butter until golden. Some families served them with white sauce, spooned over toast. Children often ate them without knowing what they were, and many a mother kept that secret for decades. One butcher recently said his grandchildren can't believe he still eats brains, along with tripe and lamb's fry. Today, most lamb brains are exported to the Middle East. Australian butchers say sales of offal now run at barely a quarter of what they were 35 years ago. Tripe was another weekly fixture. The honeycomb lining of a cow's stomach was slow cooked with mountains of onions until tender, then served swimming in white sauce. Grandmothers served it as a treat. The slippery texture and the knowledge of exactly what you were eating put many children off for life. Tripe even became Australian slang for anything worthless. For families who grew up with it, tripe and onions was comfort food, the taste of a grandmother's kitchen on a cold winter night. Then there was corned beef, or silverside as many Australians called it, a slab of beef brisket cured in brine with cloves, bay leaves and peppercorns, then simmered for hours until fork tender. The cooking liquid was never thrown away. Mums used it to make the white sauce that always accompanied the meat. Served with boiled cabbage, mashed potato and carrots cooked until soft, corned beef and white sauce was the taste of 1,000 Sunday dinners. In the 1950s, it appeared weekly in more than 60% of Australian working class homes. Leftovers went into sandwiches or were fried up as corned beef hash for breakfast. Maybe you remember that first slice hitting the plate, steam rising, the tang of cloves in the air. Not all cheap protein came from a cow. Spam arrived during the war, shipped in tins from America when fresh meat was impossible to find. By the early 1950s, Australians were eating millions of tins every year. Sliced, battered and deep-fried, spam fritters were a chip shop favourite, eaten from paper on the walk home. For families without refrigerators, tinned spam was a miracle. It sat safely in the cupboard for months. For children, it was a Friday night treat. For parents, it was survival. If you wanted something even cheaper, there was always rabbit. During the Depression, rabbiters roamed the bush, trapping and shooting to feed their families when there was nothing else. Rabbit stew cooked low and slow with root vegetables and sometimes dumplings could stretch to feed a crowd. One woman remembered that Pa loved rabbit stew. He had been a rabbiter in the Depression and that was how he fed his family. By the 1960s, myxomatosis had reduced the rabbit population and families with money had moved on to other meats. Rabbit stew became a memory, and a generation grew up unable to eat anything that looked like the Easter Bunny. Some meals needed no cooking at all. Devon sandwiches were the staple of every Australian lunchbox, thick slices of that pink processed meat layered on buttered white bread with a good squeeze of tomato sauce. Every child knew the thrill of visiting the butcher and getting a free slice while Mum waited for her order. But what you called it depended on where you lived. In New South Wales and Victoria, it was Devon. In Western Australia, it was Polony. In Tasmania, it was called Belgium. In parts of Queensland, it was Windsor sausage. In South Australia, it was Fritz, or if you were particular, bung Fritz made with sheep's intestine casing. South Australians still insist Fritz is different from Devon, and the debate continues to this day. Whatever you called it, the Devon sandwich was childhood on a plate. By the 1970s, something new was appearing on Australian dinner tables: apricot chicken. The recipe was almost embarrassingly simple: chicken pieces, a packet of French onion soup mix, and a tin of apricot nectar baked in the oven and served on rice. The Women's Weekly Cookbook made it famous, and Maggie even released a dedicated sauce mix. For busy mums balancing work and home, it was modern magic. Children loved the sweet, tangy flavour. It appeared at dinner parties and weeknight tables alike. By the 1990s, tastes had moved on, and apricot chicken became a punchline for daggy 1970s cooking. Yet today, with grocery prices rising, it is quietly making a comeback. Curried sausages followed a similar path. Snags were cooked in a sauce made from Keen's curry powder, onions, and a generous dollop of fruit chutney. The sweetness of the sultanas, the warmth of the curry, the familiar snap of the sausage. It wasn't Indian, it wasn't authentic, but it was Australian, and families across the country ate it weekly. For a midweek meal, nothing beat savoury mince. Beef mince browned with onion, flavoured with a shake of Keen's curry powder or Worcestershire sauce, and stretched with frozen peas and carrots. Served on toast, rice, or mashed potato, it could feed a family for next to nothing. Every mother had her own version, passed down or invented out of necessity. Vegetables too had their own place, though rarely a glamorous one. Cabbage boiled until the house filled with that unmistakable smell, the leaves collapsing into limp strands served with a ladle full of white sauce. It wasn't about flavour, it was about making sure every child ate their greens. The smell clung to curtains and wallpaper for days. School canteens served mountains of it, and children pushed it around their plates waiting for the pudding that followed. And what puddings they were. Sago, those tiny pearls, were cooked in sweetened milk until they turned translucent and served warm with a spoonful of jam. Children called it frog spawn, and the nickname stuck. Junket is milk set with rennet into a delicate, wobbly dessert, topped with nutmeg. And tinned fruit with custard. 2 fruits, those diced peaches and pears in syrup, poured into a bowl and drowned in bird's custard made from powder. It was Christmas dinner and Tuesday night dessert all at once. For something more substantial, there was steak and kidney pudding, chuck steak and lamb kidneys wrapped in suet pastry, steamed for hours until the kitchen windows fogged with condensation. Cutting through that crust to reveal the rich, dark gravy inside was the highlight of many a Sunday. By the early 1950s, an estimated 3 million Australian households were making some form of steak and kidney dish every week. Today, kidneys have become expensive, and they are shipped overseas to markets that still appreciate them. The puddings have all but disappeared. And then there were rissoles, mincemeat mixed with breadcrumbs, onion and egg, shaped into patties, then fried until golden. Every family had their own recipe, served with mashed potato, peas, and a river of tomato sauce. Rissoles were Australian comfort food at its finest. The movie The Castle made them famous to a new generation, but for those who grew up in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, rissoles never needed a celebrity endorsement. They were simply what Mum made on a Wednesday night. And that's the truth about these 20 everyday Australian meals. They weren't fancy, they weren't fashionable, but they were ours. They carried families through hard times, stretched tight budgets, and filled hungry bellies. For better or worse, they left memories you can still taste if you close your eyes. Which of these do you remember from your own childhood? Maybe it was Devon sandwiches in your lunchbox, maybe it was sago pudding at your grandmother's house. Maybe it was the smell of boiled cabbage you couldn't escape. Share your memories in the comments. I would love to know which dish takes you straight back. And if you enjoyed this trip down Australia's food memory lane, do not forget to subscribe. There are plenty more stories where these came from.